Your life as a guardsman. You're standing in a line that stretches for miles, feeling the cold rain of the hive's upper level runoff dripping down your neck. The man next to you is shaking so hard, his teeth are rattling, but you just feel numb. An officer in a sharp green uniform walks past, looking at you like you're a piece of meat at a butcher's shop. He stamps a piece of parchment and hands it to you. And just like that, your life as a factory worker is over. You wake up from that dream. The sun never actually reaches the floor of your level in the hive. So you grew up thinking the world was just different shades of rusty gray. Your home is a hive block that smells like old grease and the sour breath of 4 million people who haven't seen a tree in 1,000 years. Life is a cycle of waking up to the sound of grinding gears and spending 14 hours in the factorum, where you bowl places onto tanks that are destined for stars you can't even name. You always figured you would die here like everyone else, probably from the lung clog or a stray spark in the chem vats, having accomplished nothing out of this miserable ordinary in your life. But everything changes when the black ships arrive for the Tithe. The planetary governors don't care about your dreams or your fear of the dark because they have a quota to fill for the God Emperor. So, the enforcers come into the Hab block with their shock malls and heavy boots, kicking down doors and dragging young men and women into the streets. You're standing in the same mile-long line, feeling the same cold rain down your neck. You turn your head to check for the man shaking so hard his teeth are rattling. And there he is. This time, you don't feel numb. You feel scared. Any second now, you look up, and the officer in green stamps the parchment and forces it into your hand. You didn't want this, but you can't say you weren't warned beforehand. You now belong to the Astra Militarum. They herd you onto a transport ship that's so big it feels like a flying city, and the smell inside is a mix of stale incense and industrial cleaner. There are thousands of you packed into the hold, sleeping on thin mats and eating paste that tastes like wet cardboard and chalk. The ship rumbles and groans as it leaves the atmosphere, and for a second, you feel a weird weightlessness that makes your stomach flip. Then the engines kick in, and you realize you're leaving the only world you've ever known to fight monsters you only heard about in scary stories. You can't believe you feel this, but you miss home, and you fear you may never experience home again. Your first few days are spent in a blur of shouting and cold showers, where they shave your head and give you a uniform that's 2 sizes too big. It's stiff and smells like mothballs. The green fabric feels heavy and real in your hands. The voyage through the warp is something nobody can prepare you for, because the air itself starts to feel oily and wrong. The priests tell you to keep your eyes on the deck and pray to the Emperor, but you can't help hearing the scratching on the outer hall. It sounds like a million fingernails trying to find a way inside, and sometimes you see things out of the corner of your eye that shouldn't be there. One of the recruits in your base starts screaming in his sleep and won't stop, so the commissar comes in and handles it with a single, loud shot. Nobody says a word after that. You just stare at the metal ceiling and try to remember what the color of the hive's dim light felt like, because the red emergency lights of the ship are starting to make your head throb. Eventually, the ship reaches the training world, and this is where the real nightmare begins. The sergeants are men made of scars and bad attitudes, and they seem to hate you specifically for being alive. They wake you up at 4 in the morning by throwing a flash grenade into the barracks, and then they make you run until your lungs feel like they're filled with hot glass. You spend weeks learning how to march in perfect lines, because the officers say that the soldier who can't walk straight can't shoot straight. But the most important part is when they finally hand you your las gun. It's a blocky piece of metal and plastic, but they tell you to take care of it like you would your wife. You chuckle as your wife would never look this ugly, but the sergeant tells you it's your life now, and if you lose it, he'll make sure you regret being born. Learning to fire the las gun is actually pretty simple, but keeping it clean in the mud is the hard part. You spend hours taking it apart and putting it back together until you can do it with your eyes closed and your fingers numb from the cold. The beam of red light it shoots is fast and hot, and when it hits a practice target, the smell of burnt wood fills the air. They tell you it can punch through solid rock, but you've seen the size of some of the tanks on the transport, and you wonder if this little flashlight is really going to save you. Still, the weight of the rifle against your shoulder gives you a tiny bit of hope. You name yours Vengeance, because it sounds tough, even though you're still not sure who you're supposed to be getting revenge on it yet. Training isn't just about shooting though, because you also have to learn how to dig. You dig trenches until your back aches like it never has before, and your hands are a mess of blisters and dirt. And then, the sergeant tells you to fill them back in and start over. He says the shovel is just as important as the gun, because the dirt is the only thing that will keep you from being turned into a red smear by enemy artillery. You learn to live in the mud, to eat while standing up in a puddle, and to sleep while the heavy guns are booming in the distance. The camaraderie starts to build then, as you share a joke with the guy next to you about how the sergeant's face looks like a squashed rocks. His name is Corin, and he's from a mining world where they don't have sun either. You become friends because you're both terrified and there's nobody else to talk to. One morning, the shouting is louder than usual, and you're ordered to pack your gear in 5 minutes. The regiment is being deployed to a world called Veridia, which is apparently being invaded by something the officers just call the Green Menace. You climb into a Valkyrie transport, and the engine roar is so loud you can't hear your own thoughts. As the ship drops toward the planned surface, the pilot starts swearing over the comms because the sky is filled with explosions. You look out the small window and see the ground is a patchwork of fire and smoke. Your stomach drops as the ship banks hard to avoid a flak shell, and then the door slides open. The sergeant screams for everyone to get out, and you jump into the waist-deep mud of a war zone. The air on Veridia tastes like sulfur and burnt meat, and the sound of the battle is like a physical weight pressing against your ears. You scramble into a trench, while green-skinned monsters the size of small buildings charge across the field. They're screaming and waving giant axes, and they don't seem to care that your squad is opening fire. You pull the trigger of your last gun, and the red beams dance across the field, hitting the monsters in chests and heads. Some of them fall, but more just keep coming. Your heart is hammering against your ribs so hard it hurts, and you're breathing so fast your vision starts to blur. But you remember the training, so you keep your head down and keep switching out your power packs. The first time an orc gets into the trench, everything becomes a mess of screaming and blood. It's taller than any human you've ever seen, with tusks that look like they could bite through a tank. Corin is right next to you, and he stabs at the thing with his bayonet, but the orc just laughs and bats him aside like a fly. Even though your best and only friend just took a blow possibly hard enough to kill him, you're so filled with adrenaline and fear that you don't think. You just jam your last gun into the monster's throat and pull the trigger and jam and pull him until the power pack clicks empty. The orc falls on top of you, and its blood is hot and smells like rotten vegetables. You push the heavy body off and find Corin clutching his arm, looking pale and shocked. You're relieved and help him up, get back to the line, because the next wave is already hitting the wire. Days turn into weeks, the trench becomes your whole world. You stop caring about the color of your uniform because it's permanently coated in a layer of gray muck. Your rations are cold and salty, and you have to pick the gravel out of them before you can swallow, but they're the only thing giving you energy to keep moving and keep living. Sometimes the fighting stops for a few hours and you just sit there in silence, listening to the rain hit your helmet. You think about the hive and the factorum, and it feels like a different life entirely. You'd give anything for a warm bed and a bowl of that terrible gray soup right now. But then the whistles blow again, and you have to stand up and face the screaming monsters once more. The scale of the war is what really breaks your mind, because you realize you're just one of millions of soldiers. You see the massive Baneblade tanks rolling past your position, their tracks as tall as a house, and their guns loud enough to burst your eardrums. You see the explosions on the horizon that are whole cities being leveled by orbital strikes. It makes you feel tiny, like an ant in a forest fire. You start to understand why the commissars are so strict, because if they didn't keep everyone moving, the sheer weight of the horror would make everyone just sit down and give up. You want to die, but you also don't know how anyone could possibly survive this for more than a month. One night, the sergeant tells you that the regiment has planned to go over the top at dawn. You're supposed to charge across no man's land to take a hill that has a big orc gun on it. You spend the night checking your gear and trying to write a letter home, even though you know it will probably never be delivered. You give Corin your extra socks because his are full of holes, and he gives you a small metal charm he found in the dirt. When the sun starts to peek through the smog, the whole line goes quiet. The officers pull out their power swords and check their watches. Your hands are shaking, so you grip your lasgun until your knuckles turn white. The whistle blows, and it's the most terrifying sound you've ever heard. You scramble up the ladder and out of the trench, and suddenly there's nothing between you and the enemy but 500 yards of open mud. Bullets are whistling past your head like angry warnings, and the ground is exploding all around you. You see men you've known for months get torn in an instant, but you can't stop to help them, or you'll be next. You just keep running, screaming at the top of your lungs because it's the only way to keep them from freezing up. The hill looks so far away, and the orc gun is spitting fire that turns the ground into glass. You reach the base of the hill, and it's a chaotic scramble through the rocks. You're shooting at anything that moves, and you're so high on adrenaline that you don't even notice when a piece of shrapnel cuts your cheek. You and Corin find a gap in the orcs' defenses and push through, tossing grenades into their dugouts. The explosions are muffled and wet. You reach the top and see the big gun, which is a massive pile of scrap metal that shouldn't even be able to fire. There are orcs everywhere, and the fighting becomes a blur of bayonets and rifle butts. You feel a sharp pain in your shoulder, but you just keep swinging until the last of the monsters is down. You won the hill, but when the smoke clears, you realize only a dozen men from your company are left. You sit on a crate of orc ammo and watch the sun go down, feeling a strange emptiness in your chest. Corin is sitting nearby, looking at the metal charm in his hand. You've taken the objective, but you know there's another hill tomorrow, and another one after that. The victory feels small compared to the price you paid, but the sergeant just walks around and tells you to get ready to dig. The war doesn't care about your feelings, and the Emperor needs a soldier to be ready for the next charge. A few months later, the regiment is pulled off Veridia and sent to a moon that's nothing but ice and jagged rocks. They say the enemy here is something called the Tyranids. They describe them as giant bugs that want to eat the whole galaxy, which sounds like a joke until you see the first swarm. You're stationed at a research outpost on the edge of a frozen canyon, and the wind is so cold it feels like it's biting through your armor. You have to keep your lasgun power packs inside your coat so they don't freeze and lose their charge. The silence here is even worse than the noise of the orcs, because you know something is out there in the dark, waiting for the lights to go out. The attack happens in the middle of a blizzard. The bugs move faster than anything you've ever seen. They don't scream like orcs because they are hissing and clicking their claws as they scramble over the walls. You're firing your lasgun into the white wall of snow, hitting shapes that look like nightmares with too many legs. The sergeant is shouting for everyone to hold the line, but the swarm is endless. You see a man get pulled into the darkness by a long purple tongue, and his scream is cut short by a wet crunch. You back up toward the main bunker, feeling the heat of the bugs' breath as they get closer. You find yourself trapped in a hallway with 3 other guardsmen, and the air is filled with a smell of acid. The Tyranids are trying to claw through the reinforced doors, and the metal is shrieking under the pressure. You realize this is probably the end, so you check your last power pack and look at Corin. He just nods and fixes his bayonet, but then the door behind you opens, and a giant in blue armor steps through. It's a space marine, and he's carrying a bolter that sounds like a cannon. He doesn't say anything to you, because he just starts firing, and each shot turns a Tyranid into a spray of ichor. He moves with a grace that shouldn't be possible for someone that big. And you realize that you're just the distraction that held the line until the real warriors arrived. The Space Marine clears the hallway in seconds, and then moves on without even looking back. You and Corinne just stand there, covered in bug guts, and shaking from the cold. You feel a weird mix of relief and resentment because you almost died for a hallway that he cleared like it was nothing. But that's the life of a guardsman. You're the meat that slows down the enemy, the grit in the gears that keeps the machine running just a little bit longer. You don't get the glory or the fancy armor, but without you, the whole Imperium would have fallen a long time ago. You pick up your rifle and follow the giant into the next room, because there are still bugs that need killing. After the moon mission, you get a medal. That's just a cheap piece of tin on a ribbon. You put it in your pocket and wonder if it's supposed to make up for the fact that you can't stop your hands from shaking anymore. The regiment is sent to a world that's actually beautiful, with green fields and blue oceans. But you only see the inside of a bunker near the spaceport. You spend your days guarding a fuel depot, which is boring, but at least it's warm. You and Corin sit on the roof and watch transport ships taking off, carrying the wounded back to the hospital worlds. You wonder if you'll ever be on one of those ships, or you'll just end up in a shallow grave on some nameless rock. One day, a high-ranking officer comes to inspect the depot, and he's wearing a cape that probably cost more than your whole hab block back home. He looks at your squad with a bored expression and asks if you're loyal to the throne. You all shout, "Yes, sir!" because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside, you're thinking about the way the supply crates are always half empty. You're fighting for the survival of humanity, but it feels like the people in charge are more interested in their own comfort. You don't say that out loud, though, because the commissar is standing right behind the officer, and his hand is resting on his pistol. The war moves on, and you move with it. You see worlds made of lava, worlds made of crystal, and some that have been burned so badly there's nothing left but ash. You stop counting the years because the warp makes time feel like a liquid that's constantly shifting. Sometimes you feel like you've been a soldier for a decade, and other times it feels like you just left the hive a few days ago. Your face is a map of scars now, and you've lost a couple of toes to frostbite, but you're still alive. That makes you a veteran, which mostly just means you get the first pick of the rations and the best spot in the trench. You're currently stationed on a hive world that looks a lot like home, but it's under siege by rebels who have turned away from the Emperor's light. Fighting other humans is different, because you can hear them praying to the same gods you were taught to love. It makes your stomach turn, but the sergeant says they're traitors and that's all you need to focus on. You spend weeks clearing hive blocks, floor by floor, tossing frag grenades into rooms and shooting anyone who doesn't have a double-headed eagle on their chest. It's dirty, miserable work, and the smell of the burning city reminds you of the Factorum fires. One afternoon, you find a group of civilians hiding in a basement, and they're terrified of you. They see your green uniform and your lasgun, and they think you're the monster. You try to tell them you're there to save them, but then you look at yourself in a broken mirror. You're covered in soot and blood. Your eyes are sunken into your head, and you're holding a weapon that's killed hundreds of people. You realize that to them, there isn't much difference between you and the monsters you've been fighting. You just leave them a couple of ration bars and keep moving, because the rebels are regrouping in the next sector. The rebels have a heavy stubber set up at the end of a long hallway, and it's pinning your squad down. You can hear the bullets thudding into the wall next to your head, and you know you can't stay here much longer. Corin looks at you and points to a side door that leads to the ventilation shafts. You nod, and while the rest of the squad provides covering fire, the two of you crawl into the narrow metal tube. It's hot and cramped, and the smell of dust is choking you. You move slowly, trying not to make any noise, until you're right above the gun nest. You drop through the ceiling tile and land right on top of the gunner, knocking him to the floor. The fight is short and brutal, and when it's over, the hallway is clear. But as you're standing up, you see Corin leaning against the wall, clutching his stomach. There's a red stain spreading across his uniform, and his face is the color of old parchment. You rush over and try to apply a field dressing, but there's too much blood. He looks at you and tries to smile, but he just coughs and shakes his head. He hands you the metal charm he's been carrying since Veridia and tells you to keep it. Then his eyes go flat. He's gone. You sit there in the dark for a long time, holding your friend's hand and listening to the sounds of the war outside. You don't have time to mourn, because the sergeant is already calling for the next objective. You put his charm in your pocket and pick up your rifle, feeling a cold hardness settling into your soul. You've lost everyone you started with now, and you're the only one left from the original Tithe group. It hits you. You're not a person anymore. At least you don't get to be. You're a tool of the Imperium, a weapon that keeps functioning until it breaks. You walk out into the street and see the fire reflecting in the puddles. For the first time, you don't feel afraid. You just feel tired. The siege ends when the Navy arrives and bombs the rebel headquarters into dust. You watch from the outskirts of the city as the massive spires collapse, feeling a sense of satisfaction that's quickly replaced by the realization that you're being reassigned again. This time, the destination is a world called Cadia, which the veterans talk about with a respect that borders on fear. They say it's the gateway to hell, and that if it falls, the whole galaxy goes with it. You climb onto the transport ship and find a spot in the hold, not even bothering to look out the window as you leave the planet. Cadia is a world of fortresses and endless drill fields where every man, woman, and child is born with a rifle in their hand. The air is crisp and smells of ozone, and the sky is dominated by a massive, swirling eye of purple light that never goes away. The Cadian soldiers look at your regiment with a bit of disdain because they think everyone else is soft compared to them. You don't care though, you just do your drills and keep your gear clean because the purple light in the sky is getting brighter every day. Something big is coming, and you can feel it in your bones. The invasion starts with a sound that isn't a sound at all really, but more of a vibration that makes your teeth ache. The sky turns black as thousands of ships drop out of the warp, and the orbital platforms start firing with a fury that lights up the night. You're stationed in a bunker on the outer perimeter. The ground is shaking so hard the lights are flickering. The sergeant tells you to check your bayonet and say your prayers, because this is the one they'll write the history books about. You look at the men around you, most of them kids who haven't even seen their first orc, and you feel a strange sense of responsibility. You tell them to keep their heads down and wait for your signal. The things that come out of the drop pods aren't orcs or Tyranids, or any of the enemies you fought before. They're humans, but in twisted spiked armor who scream about dark gods. They're followed by demons that look like they were made of fire and nightmares, and the sight of them is enough to give a normal man a life of trauma. But you've seen the abyss, and you've looked it in the eye before. You open fire, and the red beams of the last guns cut through the chaos, holding the line against the tide of madness. The bunker is filled with the smell of ozone and burnt meat, and the noise is so loud you can't even hear yourself screaming. The battle for Cadia goes on for months, and the world literally starts to break apart under the strain. You're fighting in the ruins of a city that was once beautiful, using the rubble as cover against the endless waves of traitors. You've run out of rations and you're drinking water from the cracked pipes, but you don't stop. You can't stop. The only other option is add yourself to the death count. But the kids need you, and Korn's death would have been for nothing. You clutch his charm near your heart and feel his presence again. You feel he wants you to live on for the both of you. As you fight on, you see the black stone fortresses in the sky, and you know the end is near. One night, the ground opens up in a massive rip, and you see the world itself beginning to tear. The sergeant tells you to retreat to the extraction ships, but you know there aren't enough ships for everyone. You find yourself at the landing pads, helping the younger recruits get onto the transports while the enemy closes in. The air is thick with the smell of the warp. The ground is literally melting under your feet. You see the last ship preparing to take off, and you push a crying kid into the open hatch. He looks at you and asks why you aren't coming, and you just give him Korn's metal charm and tell him to live on no matter what it takes. The door closes and the ship rises into the smoke-filled sky. You're left on the platform with a handful of other veterans, watching as the black ships of the enemy descend like vultures. You check your last gun and see that you have one power pack left. You click it into place and feel the familiar hum of the weapon. The traitors are coming up the stairs, their armor covered in the blood of your brothers, and their voices sounding like a choir of the damned. You don't feel scared, and you don't even feel tired anymore. What you feel is just a deep, calm sense of duty and purpose. You're a guardsman of the Imperium, and your job is to hold the line until the very end. You fix your bayonet one last time, and stand tall as the first of the monsters reaches the top of the stairs. The world around you is screaming, and the sky is falling, but you just focus on the front side of your rifle. You remember the hive, the factorum, the mud of Veridia, and the ice of the moon. You remember Corin, and the thousands of other soldiers who died so you could stand here today. You pull the trigger, and the red light of your las gun is a tiny spark in the darkness. But it's a spark that refuses to go out. You're not a hero, and you're not a legend, because you're just a soldier who does his job, and does his job damn well. As the darkness finally closes in, you realize that for a few seconds, you were the most important person in the whole galaxy. Because as long as you were standing, the Emperor's light was still burning. The ground finally gives way, and the planet Cadia shatters into a billion pieces. But the spirit of the guard doesn't break. Somewhere out there, on 1,000 other worlds, another young man is being dragged out of a headlock and handed a las gun. He'll learn to dig, he'll learn to shoot, and he'll learn to survive in a universe that wants to eat him alive. He'll make friends, and he'll lose them, and he'll see things that no human should ever have to see. But he'll keep moving forward because the line has to be held, and the light has to be kept alive. You were just one part of the story, but the story is far from over. Hopefully. The ship with a young recruit reaches its destination, and the door slides open to reveal a new war zone. The air tastes like sulfur, and the ground is a patchwork of fire and smoke. The boy jumps into the mud, clutching his rifle with white knuckles, and looks up at the sky. He sees the ships landing and the tanks rolling past, and he feels the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders. But then he reaches into his pocket and feels a small, cold metal charm, and he remembers the man who gave it to him. It must have been so important to that man. He traded it for his own life. Now it's the boy's turn. He takes a deep breath, fixes his bayonet, and steps into the fray, because his life as a guardsman has just begun.